I said it before I had time to think. The words felt heavier than they should have, too rehearsed for someone who swore he hadn't been waiting. But I had been. That's the part one can't admit out loud. The first time I noticed her, I was fixing the crooked shelf at the back of the old bookstore where I'd been working part-time. With splinters bit into my palms, the smell of dust and paper mixing with the faint citrus cleaner the owner swore by. I heard the door chime, and when I turned, she was already halfway inside. She didn't look around like most people did, hunting for bargains or whispering about how cramped the place was. She walked like she belonged in silence, straight posture, dark green cardigan draped over her shoulders, a paper cup of coffee in her hand. The kind of presence that rearranges a room without asking permission. I almost said hello. Instead, I bent lower to the shelf, pretending to measure the wood against my thumb. She stopped near me, close enough that I could feel the shift of air when she moved. Her voice, low, steady, broke the quiet. "You're too late." I glanced up, confused, until I saw the book in her hand. The one copy people kept asking for, the battered hardback of a poet I couldn't pronounce. I'd promised a regular customer I'd set it aside, but I hadn't. Her eyes met mine. Not accusing, not demanding, just holding me there longer than they should have. "For you," I heard myself say. "I'll always be on time." It sounded ridiculous. Too bold. My ears burned as soon as the words slipped out. She tilted her head, the faintest curve of a smile pulling at her mouth, and said nothing. Just placed the book gently on the counter as if the conversation hadn't happened. The silence after was louder than anything I'd ever heard. I tried to distract myself, went back to hammering the shelf, tapping harder than necessary. But my hands betrayed me. Nails bent, wood cracked, and still my eyes kept drifting toward her. She leaned against the counter, reading the back cover, her fingers tracing the faded lettering like she'd touched it before. Every movement she made carried a quiet certainty I couldn't name. She wasn't young in the way people my age were, restless, eager to fill every pause. She seemed carved from stillness itself, unafraid of silence. And that made me restless. When she finally spoke again, it was simple. "You missed a nail." I looked down. She was right. A crooked one stuck out near the corner. My laugh came out sharper than I wanted. "Guess I'm late for more than books today." She didn't laugh, but her eyes softened, the kind of look that makes you think she sees more than you want to show. She sipped her coffee, left the book on the counter, and walked out without another word. The door closed behind her, and the chimes sounded again. Too ordinary for a moment that felt anything but. I stood there with the hammer still in my hand, the smell of old paper thick in the air, wondering if she'd come back, or if I'd just ruined my only chance with someone I shouldn't have noticed in the first place. What stays with me isn't the book, or the crooked shelf, or even the words we said. It's the pause between them, the stretch of silence that pressed against my chest, heavy and electric, as if the room itself had been holding its breath. And I can't stop thinking about how her eyes lingered just a second too long. Long enough to make me believe she heard more in my words than I meant to give away. She came back 3 days later. Not for the book, I noticed that right away. It was still tucked behind the counter, untouched. She stepped inside just as I was sweeping dust from the floor, and for a moment I thought she might leave again without a word. Instead, she asked, "Do you know where the travel section is?" Her voice was steady, but there was something softer around the edges this time, like she was carrying more weight than her hands could hold. I pointed her toward the far corner, and without thinking, I set the broom aside and followed. The shelves back there leaned worse than the others, warped with age. I offered to help her look, pretending that was the reason I'd followed. She didn't argue. She just stood there, her cardigan slipping off one shoulder, scanning the faded spines. "What are you looking for?" I asked. She hesitated before answering. "Anywhere but here." Then, with a quick, self-conscious shake of her head, "I mean, guides, old ones. Not glossy magazines." Her choice of words lingered. "Anywhere but here." I pulled a worn paperback from the shelf and handed it to her. Our fingers brushed, not enough to mean anything, but enough to feel like it did. She drew her hand back quickly, her eyes flicking to mine for the briefest second. That flicker carried something I wasn't supposed to notice. Exhaustion, Maybe, or the kind of loneliness that hides itself behind composure. She covered it with a small laugh, too quick. I didn't mean to make you my assistant. I shrugged, pretending it didn't matter. But it did. I kept noticing things I shouldn't. The faint tremor in her left hand when she turned the pages, the way she pressed her lips together as if stopping words before they escaped, the deep lines at the corner of her eyes that didn't match the calm smile she wore. You read these often? I asked, nodding to the stack she'd gathered. Not really. I like the maps, she said, tracing one with her fingertip. It's comforting to know the roads lead somewhere, even if you're not the one walking them. Her tone slipped quiet at the end, as though she hadn't meant to say that aloud. I didn't answer. I didn't trust my voice not to give something away. Instead, I bent to fix a loose shelf bracket, my hands moving just for the sake of moving. She stood above me, the scent of coffee still clinging to her clothes, pages rustling as she flipped through a book without really reading. I wanted to ask her why she came here instead of anywhere else. I wanted to ask her if the silence between us unsettled her the way it unsettled me. But I said nothing. When I finally stood, brushing dust from my palms, she was watching me. Not openly. Her eyes lifted the second mine did, but long enough to leave me caught in the middle of it. She closed the book gently, as though afraid of breaking it, and handed it to me. I'll take this one. Her fingers lingered against the cover longer than necessary before letting go. And that, just that, was enough to leave the air thick again, humming with something I couldn't name but couldn't shake, either. The storm started earlier than the forecast had warned. By the time I locked the shop door, rain was already streaming down the windows, making the street outside blur like watercolor. I thought I was alone, until I heard the rustle of pages behind me. She was still there. At first I assumed she hadn't noticed the time, but the way she sat at the small reading table near the back, hands folded over a book she hadn't turned in minutes, told me otherwise. Her cardigan was draped on the chair, shoulders bare, posture uncharacteristically slouched. You'll get stuck here, I said, keeping my tone light. Her eyes lifted to mine. Maybe that's the point. It wasn't the kind of answer you give a stranger, and yet it felt like the only one she could have given me. I busied myself with stacking returns, pretending her words didn't pull at me. The air carried the thick scent of rain and wet asphalt, mixed with the faint citrus cleaner that never seemed to leave this place. She stayed quiet, except for the occasional tap of her nail against the book cover, a restless rhythm that betrayed her calm face. You don't have to wait, I said finally, though the thought of her leaving tightened something in my chest. She shook her head. I don't mind the rain. Then, after a pause, it drowns out everything else. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It pressed in, heavy with things unsaid. I sat across from her, the table too small to pretend we weren't close. My knee brushed hers under the wood, and neither of us moved. Her hair had loosened, strands falling across her cheek. I wanted to reach out, tuck them behind her ear, but my hands stayed flat against the table, fingers curling against the restraint. Her phone buzzed then, slicing the moment apart. She didn't answer, just flipped it face down, the screen still glowing with a name I almost recognized before it faded. Someone important? I asked carefully. Her lips pressed into a line. Not anymore. She said it so quietly I almost missed it. And when her eyes met mine again, I saw the same flicker as before, that exhaustion, that loneliness hiding behind composure. I wanted to tell her I noticed, that I wasn't fooled by her calm voice, or her perfect posture, or the careful way she measured every word. Instead, I laughed too softly, shaking my head. You're hard to read. Her gaze lingered on me, steady and searching, like she was deciding whether to prove me wrong. The storm rumbled above us, thunder vibrating through the glass. She leaned forward, elbows resting on the table, and for a second her face was close enough that I could see the faint scar just above her lip, the one you'd never notice unless you were this near. I thought she might say something, confess, maybe, or let slip the truth behind all her pauses. My pulse thudded with the certainty of it. But then she stood, pushing the chair back with deliberate calm. The rain's easing, she murmured, reaching for her cardigan. And just like that, the moment collapsed. leaving me with nothing but the ghost of her nearness and the sound of water. She didn't come for a week. I told myself I didn't notice, but I caught my eyes drifting to the door every time the chime rang. The shop felt emptier without her, the quiet not the same kind of quiet. When she finally walked in, it was late, almost closing time. She looked different, not in clothes or hair, but in the way she carried herself. Her confidence seemed thinner, like fabric worn down at the seams. She asked nothing, bought nothing, just drifted toward the corner table where she'd sat during the storm, running her hand along the edge as though testing if it would hold. I wiped down the counter twice, though it was already clean, before I finally joined her. "You disappeared," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Her eyes stayed on the table. "I didn't mean to." Then, softer. "Sometimes I do that." I wanted to ask why. I wanted to demand it. But instead I just sat, the distance between us smaller than it should have been. The silence stretched. She didn't fidget this time, didn't pretend to read. She only looked at me, long enough that my throat tightened under the weight of it. Finally, she spoke. "What are we doing?" Her words cracked through the quiet like glass breaking. I froze, because I didn't have an answer. Because the question wasn't about sitting at a table or browsing books. It was about this. Whatever we'd been circling without admitting. "I don't know," I said truthfully. She let out a breath, a shaky one that betrayed more than she meant it to. "I shouldn't be here." I could have agreed. Should have agreed. But I couldn't. Her hands were clasped together on the table, knuckles pale from the pressure. I noticed how tightly she held herself, as if one slip, one wrong word, and the whole facade would collapse. "You're here," I said quietly. She shut her eyes at that, like it hurt to hear. When she opened them again, there was no shield left. Just the raw, tired truth. "You're too young," she whispered. The words landed heavier than I expected. Not an insult, more like an admission. A confession of fear, of the line she couldn't bring herself to step across. I wanted to argue, to tell her it didn't matter, but the look in her eyes stopped me. Because I realized it mattered to her. It mattered enough that she'd been fighting it since the first day. We sat there, no words left, only the hum of the old light above us and the thud of my pulse in my ears. Her gaze drifted to the window, to the reflection of us sitting too close, and her voice broke the silence one last time, fragile, unguarded. "This was never supposed to happen." And then she looked at me as though asking me to undo it, to make the moment vanish. But I couldn't. I just sat there, wishing silence could hold the things words had already ruined. Dripping from the awning outside. The next time I saw her, she wasn't looking for books. She was sitting at the counter when I came back from the storeroom, a small envelope resting beneath her hand. No cardigan this time, no careful armor, just a plain white blouse, sleeves rolled neatly, hair pulled back like she'd stopped trying to make it perfect. She didn't speak right away, just traced the corner of the envelope with her finger. "I almost didn't come," she said finally. I leaned against the opposite side of the counter, keeping my voice even. "But you did." Her eyes flicked up to mine, then back down. "Because of this." She slid the envelope closer, but didn't open it. "It's a letter. My daughter wrote it before she left for university. She said I should start living again." I didn't know what to say. The envelope looked too thin to hold something so heavy. She gave a small, almost embarrassed laugh. "She thinks I hide in places like this. And maybe I do. Maybe that's why I come here instead of anywhere else." Her voice cracked on anywhere. The bookstore's hum felt louder, the clock ticking, the rain gutter outside dripping steady as a metronome. I wanted to reach for the letter, to take some of its weight from her, but my hands stayed still. "She left me this," she went on, pressing her palm against the envelope. "And I didn't open it until last night. It's not long, just a few lines. But," she swallowed hard, "you remind me of him. Of her father. Not the man he became, but the man he was when I met him." Her words struck me like a bruise I didn't see coming. I wasn't sure if it was supposed to comfort or distance me, but it did both. Something inside me tightened, wanting to step closer, while another part stepped back, afraid of being just a ghost of someone else. "I'm not him," I said too quickly. "I know." Her eyes softened, and for the first time I saw the raw edge of her regret without the mask. "That's the problem. The silence after that left me unsteady, like the floorboards beneath us had shifted. I searched her face for something to anchor me, but all I saw was the faint tremor in her jaw, the way she blinked too long as though to keep from spilling everything she wasn't ready to say. She pushed the letter back into her bag and stood. I thought she might leave without another word, the way she often did. But at the door, she turned. "I shouldn't keep coming here," she said. Her hand tightened around the strap of her bag. "But I will." And with that, she stepped into the fading light, leaving me staring at the empty counter, my chest tight with the weight of her honesty, and the terrible, undeniable truth that I wanted her to keep coming back, no matter what it cost either of us. The shop was nearly empty when she arrived that evening. Golden lights spilled across the floorboards, and dust hung in the air like a slow snowfall. I was restocking returns, moving slower than I needed to, when I felt her presence before I saw her. She didn't speak at first, just set her bag down on the counter and walked toward me, her steps deliberate, as though each one required permission she wasn't sure she had. "You should tell me to stop coming," she said finally. I looked at her, really looked. Her blouse was wrinkled from the day, strands of hair loose around her face, eyes rimmed with the kind of tiredness that goes deeper than sleep. But beneath it all, there was something open now, unshielded. "I can't," I admitted. Her breath hitched. Not dramatic, just a quiet slip in her control. She glanced away, pretending to scan the shelf nearest her, but her hand lingered on the wood, fingers tapping lightly as though she was grounding herself. "We don't make sense," she whispered. "I know." The silence between us filled everything else. I wanted to step closer, but I stayed where I was, letting her decide. She turned then, her eyes finding mine, unguarded in a way they had never been. "All this time," she said slowly, "I've been afraid you were only chasing something I couldn't give, a version of me I've already lost." I shook my head. "I don't want who you were." My voice caught, softer than I meant. "I want right now." Her lips parted, but no words came. Only the smallest, almost imperceptible shift, the way her shoulders lowered, the way her body stopped holding itself so tightly. She stepped forward, closing the space between us until I could see the faint lines around her eyes, the scar above her lip, the detail of her. She didn't touch me. She only stood close enough that I could feel the warmth of her presence, the electric nearness of what we both hadn't said. My hand twitched at my side before I let it move, slow, cautious, resting on the edge of the shelf near hers. Not touching, but waiting. For a long second, she did nothing. Then her fingers slid across the wood until they brushed mine, light as breath, and stayed there. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't a promise. But it was the first thing that felt real. We stood like that, hands barely touching, while the world outside dimmed into evening. No declarations. No resolutions. Just silence heavy with the truth neither of us could unmake. Finally, she exhaled, a sound that was half surrender, half relief. "So this is it then?" I nodded, unable to trust my voice. Her fingers pressed a little firmer against mine, sealing what words couldn't. And in that small, fragile gesture, we stopped pretending it wasn't already inevitable. I think about that night more often than I admit. Not because something dramatic happened, but because nothing had to. A brush of her hand against mine was enough to shift the ground under everything I thought I knew about connection, about timing, about what we owe to ourselves and each other. We never declared it, never gave it a name. That was the strangest part. It didn't feel unfinished, even without words. It felt truer that way. She didn't need me to rescue her, and I didn't need her to become someone she wasn't. We simply stood in the same space, saw each other without the masks, and decided not to look away. For me, that changed everything. I stopped rushing to define what mattered and started listening to the silences in between. I learned that sometimes longing isn't about chasing, but about waiting for the moment someone finally lets you see them. And her? She softened, just enough. She still carried her regrets like an old coat she couldn't quite throw away, but she stopped hiding behind them. She began letting herself want again, not loudly, not recklessly, but in small, human ways. Staying 5 minutes longer, letting her laugh reach her eyes, choosing to return when she said she wouldn't. We became something that didn't fit into neat categories. Not a storybook romance, not some wild affair. Just two people who collided at the wrong time and decided maybe there isn't such a thing as too late. I used to think love was supposed to be loud, fireworks, declarations, perfect timing. But with her, I learned it's often the opposite. It's in the pauses, the hesitations, the moments you almost walk away but don't. She once told me her daughter wanted her to start living again. I don't know if I was the reason she did, or just the reminder that she could. Maybe that's enough. Maybe being the spark, even briefly, is its own kind of permanence. When I remember the way she looked at me across that small wooden table, I don't remember fear anymore. I remember stillness and the quiet certainty that even if the world outside didn't understand, we did. And if you're listening to this, maybe that's the part worth carrying. That sometimes the right connection doesn't arrive on time. It arrives when you're finally ready to see it. She said I was too late. I told her, for you, I'll always be on time. And somehow, that was the truest thing I ever said. What about you? Have you ever felt a connection that didn't fit the rules, but still felt undeniable? Let me know in the comments.